Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation. My name is Michael Penuelas. I'm reporting to you from Paris, France, where I'm attending the COP21 conference. Welcome to all of our project partners. Welcome to all guests, and hello to everyone in the class whom I haven't seen in a couple of weeks. My project is on policy recommendations for ecologically sound management of prescribed burns in peninsula open spaces, and I'm working with Actera. So why am I looking at fire, and specifically controlled fire, prescribed burning in open spaces on the peninsula? Because historically, wildfire was a key component of ecosystem dynamics in California. In the last couple hundred years, a number of factors have disrupted the natural fire regime that used to occur in many of California's ecosystems. There are a lot of cases now in which the type of fire and the pattern of its occurrence, when we do see fires in our wildlands, are creating adverse impacts on ecosystems in terms of composition, structure, and function. These kinds of changes look like maybe obviously a long history of active fire suppression on lands of all kinds of jurisdictions, state, federal, even local and private. Changes in land use including timber management, grazing, and development, exotic invasive species, which are becoming an increasing problem with climate change, and climate change itself. And all these are placing stresses on the manner in which fire interacts with ecosystem health. So any land manager who is managing for healthy, functional ecosystems as one of their priorities, for them, fire is not only an important consideration, but a necessary one. So this is a picture of fire on Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, which is where we are currently. And you've all likely walked along or across fire roads in these preserves, but that's just one piece of the relevant evidence of fire management on the land. Prescribed or controlled burning, which you can see in this picture, being carried out by local fire teams, is a tool that land managers can utilize to reintroduce fire into systems, to allow plants to complete their life cycles, or as a control mechanism for invasive species or for other reasons. Active fire management, including prescribed burning and other forms of vegetation management, has lots of impacts on the land, and Actera and I agreed that we would look into the best management practices, or BMPs, that were followed during fire management on the peninsula, and see if we could figure out ways to make them better. So here's an outline of the presentation I'm going to give. I'm going to start with some background at a broad level and then zoom in slowly. Then I'm going to go through a quick literature review, show you what the Palo Alto Foothills Fire Management Plan looks like, which is the most proximate fire management plan I could find, discuss a quick interview with Philippe Cohen, who's the executive director of Jasper Ridge, and then talk to you about what my next steps are. At this point in the presentation, I'm going to mention that I am, as a matter of fact, not finished with this project, and I'm not going to be able to finish it for various reasons by the end of this quarter, but I'm going to present you some preliminary example findings, and then, like I said, tell you about next steps. So as we talk about fire, it's important to note that, first of all, it rarely respects jurisdictional boundaries. So to start with, I'm going to go as broadly as is relevant. But then the closer you zoom in, and of course we're talking site-specific land management here, so I will zoom in. But the closer you zoom, the more relevant conversations of individual BMPs, best management practices, become. But I think at first it's worth highlighting as well the bigger context. So in March of 2010, with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, which we're going to call CAL FIRE for the purposes of this talk, and the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection for California, plus the state government, and this was 2010, so it was under Arnie, we put together the California Fire Plan. It was considered strikingly different. This is language from the executive summary of the document itself, because it recognizes that fire will occur in California, and it works to answer the question of how do we utilize and live with that risk of wildfire. This document was established coming off of the 2007 fire season, in which there were something like 9,000 wildfires in the state. So this was something that the state was being forced to think about. Plus, it was the first fire report like this in California to be released for public review and comment. So that's going to play a really important part in what my recommendations are for Actera and for other fire managers on the peninsula. So among the goals of this fire plan were a lot that had to do with risk and management, because people are afraid of fire. Fire is a destructive force, and it can cause significant threat to human life and livelihood. But we did see that they included language about preventing wildfire threats to ecosystem health. And this is the first time I'm really finding it in any of these big statewide plans, because there were some that preceded the 2010 one. But this is the first time I'm seeing significant understanding of the fact that these big overloaded wildfires can in fact impact ecosystem health. We do, however, because of fire's destructive potential, see language like this, where when they are talking about fire as a potential for being used in prescribed burning, they say, or we can mimic its impact by other management techniques. So there is desire to use prescribed burning as little as possible because people are afraid that it will get out of control. California is, like I said, in a moment when fire is of particular concern. The reduced moisture content of vegetation that's drought stressed increases its flammability. So an active burning period of the year starts earlier and lasts longer than maybe what historical patterns looked like. As well, drought-stressed vegetation is more susceptible to insects and diseases, resulting in super high mortality in trees and shrubs in some areas, leaving wildlands in California, including those close to urban areas, with really high levels of tinder dry, dead, woody material that is ready to burn with very great intensity. Rather than the old, frequent, low-severity fires that these ecosystems adapted to. So it is important to either have fire in them or to mimic their impact by other management techniques. And this is something that we see a lot in proximity to urban areas, is that people don't necessarily want to use fire. So then we see the California Master Cooperative Wildland Fire Management Agreement, which was put together by state and federal agencies, in which they talk basically about how they're going to cooperate. But we also see this, in parentheses at the bottom, supplemental agreement for use of prescribed fire, in which they describe their objectives for the use of prescribed fire as reduction of hazardous fuel accumulation, reduction of fire hazard, ecological restoration for the purpose of flood protection, wildland and fisheries enhancement, watershed management, water yield improvement, preservation of air quality impacts from future fire, and finally, forest, rangeland, and then ecosystem health. So we do see ecosystem health, but this is the second theme that I want to bring up, is that prioritization in all of these documents includes ecosystems at the very, very tail end, and we're going to see that in local ones in just a second as well. So zooming in, like I said, looking closer, we've got strategic fire plans for different units. We've got Santa Clara unit and San Mateo, Santa Cruz unit. It's funny to note that there must have been a template that was put out with a black box with italicized green writing inside, even if people were allowed to choose different fonts. So these are the front pages of both of those. They cover, this is the Santa Clara unit. Those are its battalions outlined in black. And this is the San Mateo unit, which you can see the scale's a little bit different, but it would fit in right there. So these do overlap our area of interest, which is the San Francisco Bay Peninsula. And we see here, this is the Santa Clara unit, just for continuity. I'm just using one of the two. We see that they talk about restoring and maintaining valuable plant and wildlife habitat in their objectives. But we also see it way below all of this stuff. And I'm not necessarily making an argument for prioritizing ecosystem management for the better of the ecosystem over public safety, or to prevent the future impacts of really dangerous fires on ecosystems, but it is interesting to note that always these are prioritized in this way. And elsewhere in the Santa Clara plan, you see a list of the 15 values at risk from wildfires, and it tries to delineate their economic and non-economic values. And you see ecosystem health again last in a list of 15 values behind things like game wildlife, so the value of game wildlife over the value of ecosystem health. So it just goes to show that a prioritization is actually really important in these both state level and also local fire management plans. And because a lot of them are open, that brings me to recommendation number one. The construction processes are open. I think targeted participation in the framing and construction phases of these fire management plans is integral in order to build in space for projects and best management practices to fit in under them. Sorry, that's what FMP means, is fire management plan. Because I think textual anchors and prioritization in lists will go a long way to putting together the individual fire plans when you're trying to put a prescribed burn together. So jumping back to the presentation outline, we've run through the background. Now we're going to jump into my literature review, in which I'm trying to describe where the best sources for locality-specific best management practices were in my research process. So we've got local fire management plans, which I've described briefly, but we're going to go even more local here in just a minute. And then we've got vegetation management plans, which we're going to call the local fire management plans FMPs and the vegetation management plans VMPs, which is what they are described in the literature as. So here is the review of the resources that I've looked at, and I've compiled all of these in a folder in PDF form with my notes as one of the deliverables for this project. The black ones I have read through and selected what I think are the most important best management practices to pay attention to, either in terms of their potential for ecosystem benefit during prescribed fires or for ecosystem damage. The two in white at the bottom are from the East Bay, both of them, and I have not managed to make it to those, so that is one of my next steps, is to go through those. So my first deliverable is a compilation of 2-paragraph summaries of each of those, and 2 primary lists, a list of the ecologically sound and the ecologically damaging BMPs, and a list of useful wording from all 8 in the creation of fire management plans for individual fires in the future that would fit under these. How am I going to determine what is ecologically sound and what is ecologically damaging? Well, I've already done a fair amount of that in my own work with my background as an ecologist, but under the recommendation of Dr. Nona Chiarello, who works up here at Jasper Ridge as the lead scientist, I'm going to consult with Dr. Scott Stevens at UC Berkeley, who I've been in email contact with a little bit, but I'm hoping to actually do a longer consultation in which he reviews what I come up with at the terminus of this project, and then I can present that to Actera with his stamp of approval, as well as my own. Examples of what I have decided are long-term damaging impacts and therefore need to be avoided are soil compaction from heavy equipment involved in fires, as well as the compromising of soil chemistry from the use of chemical fire retardants. Necessary, I think, in terms of site characterization are pre-fire transects and plots, as well as post-fire data collection. I think both of these need to be factored into all best management practice lists, and I'm not finding them in quite a few. So the Palo Alto Foothills Fire Management Plan is of particular interest because of its location specificness. So I've pulled out 2 long quotations. I apologize for their length, but I'm just going to read through them really quickly because I think they're really important. Quote, only a few projects that benefit ecosystem health as their primary justification have been identified in this phase, by which it means the phase 2012 through 2014, I think. However, many of the other projects enhance natural resources while achieving other management goals. In all cases, the goal of the action is to restore a species distribution and volume of biomass to a condition of effective fire suppression through grazing and prescribed fire. So they're using prescribed fire as a means of fire suppression in the future by keeping fuel loads down, but they always talk about these ancillary benefits that it can have in terms of enhancing natural resources. I think that framing is really interesting. I think it's important that it made it in there, and I'm sure it took quite a bit of lobbying from local scientists and local organizations that are interested in ecosystem health, but I don't think that it's necessarily sufficient. Second one, this is about funding. Not even all the areas of high hazard can be treated with a reasonable level of funding, so prioritization needs to occur. Projects that enhance natural resources are difficult to fund. However, fuel management offers occasions to both enhance natural resources and fire safety. Every fuel management project should be viewed as an opportunity to simultaneously enhance natural resources and promote fire safety. So what we're seeing in this Palo Alto Foothills Fire Management Plan, which is pretty comprehensive, although I think that its best management practice section can have some significant updating done to it, potentially in the next phase. It does have this same prioritization again, including in its funding section. So I just wanted to highlight that before I moved on. And the last piece of this project is an interview with Philippe Cohen that I did. It was an extensive interview in which we talked all about the politics around fire, the science around fire, and I'm just going to read for you a couple of quotations that I pulled that I think were really important out of what he said. So this is the fire crew at a fire that he managed at Jasper Ridge, this picture. And while talking, he said, quote, the prescribed burns at Jasper Ridge became possible only because I'd been involved with Fire Safe San Mateo County. And this is Michael's words again. Fire Safe San Mateo County is an initiative here down in San Mateo County, in which a lot of organizations came together to talk about public outreach and make sure that the community understood the importance of fire management through prescribed burning and things like that. It also talks about defensible space around houses and lots of other fire initiatives. Okay, back to the quotation. I had to work hard to build up personal and trusting relationships with the local firefighting community. They know that I'm not trying to compromise their mission, and that I think what they do is important. I think it's important to remember not to try and build up trust with people when you need them. We need to learn to do that beforehand. Philippe also said, these conversations always start with risk in wild urban interface areas. Life and property first, then environmental management. If you want to go to get CAL FIRE to do a prescribed burn, it has to also be a training event or for public safety. They will rarely be able to mobilize for research or environmental reasons, so it doesn't make sense to initially pitch it that way. So what he was talking about there was that the initial pitch to these organizations has to be in language that they are able to take to their superiors. Whether or not they want to be able to do ecosystem health fire management doesn't actually matter if the overarching documents that constrain their activities don't allow them to do so. And then finally, once a fire has been set up, that's where the intervention with BMPs comes in. If it's on land you manage and you have a good relationship with the fire managers, and the legal framework is there that will allow them to be ecologically sound, then you can ensure that good BMPs are followed. So what this conversation with Philippe Cohen did was support the majority of the thinking I had been doing this quarter, but to hear it from someone who had actually conducted, as the executive director of a preserve, a number of prescribed burns with the goal, two goals, ecosystem health, but primarily research to, in the future, describe how prescribed burning could be used in ecosystem health management, was really validating and really important for my research process. Okay, so back to the presentation outline. We are now at the end of my presentation. I'm going to jump into next steps really briefly. My first deliverable, as I described earlier, is going to be this compilation of summaries and lists of BMPs that I think are going to be important, as well as useful wording from this literature review that I did. Like I said, I'm going to have to read these two final management plans before I can do that to round out my research and include East Bay, which includes a lot more grazed land than what I have seen in these ones on the West Bay Peninsula, as well as this consultation with Dr. Scott Stevens, if I can get that scheduled, to make sure that the robustness of my best management practices that I pick out is in fact there. As well, I'm going to include this database of the most relevant PDF documents, including both FMPs and VMPs from the local area with my notes and highlights. That was not intended to be a separate deliverable, but I think it would probably be important to have that accompanying what I present. As well, a synthesis of policy recommendations based on the interviews I've conducted and the interviews I will conduct, and my research regarding how to frame projects within state-level fire management regimes. So I think this is really important when you are framing a project. What it seems to me is the most important thing to keep in mind is to make sure that it fits under the legal mandate of the organizations that are going to be carrying it out. CAL FIRE is present at pretty much every prescribed burn, if not every one, in California, particularly around urban areas because of the way that they can deal with liability. And so it's really important to make sure that this framing is accurate. So that's going to be the secondary part of my deliverables. That brings me to the end of the presentation. I think that I'm going to be online right now on Skype to answer any questions, but alternatively, go ahead and send them to my email, which is just my last name. You can find it there at the bottom at stanford.edu. Thanks very much, and I hope the rest of the sessions are going well.